Hallo zusammen, herzlich willkommen zur heutigen Montagskonferenz. Es freut mich wahnsinnig, dass das Haus heute so voll ist. Ich möchte Sie alle ganz herzlich begrüßen. Besonders möchte ich auch die SchülerInnen vom Eleonoren-Gymnasium in Worms begrüßen. Schön, dass Sie heute da sind. Und nicht weniger herzlich möchte ich unseren Gastredner heute begrüßen, meinen lieben Kollegen Gillies, der extra den weiten Weg hierher heute angetreten ist, und darüber freuen wir uns sehr. Bevor ich an dich übergebe, mache ich allerdings noch ein paar Hausmitteilungen. Der Vortrag wird auf Englisch gehalten. Sollten Sie der englischen Sprache nicht mächtig sein oder sich einfach dafür interessieren, wie unsere Dolmetschstudierenden sich so schlagen, können Sie der Verdolmetschung ins Deutsche zuhören auf Kanal 1. Sie können aber auch Verdolmetschungen ins Französische, Japanische, Portugiesische, Russische, was habe ich vergessen, Italienische heute hören. Sie haben also eine große Auswahl an Sprachen, und in all diesen Sprachen können Sie sich hier natürlich auch ausdrücken und das Wort ergreifen. Ich möchte auch ganz herzlich alle Teilnehmenden in der Zoom-Konferenz begrüßen. Sie haben dann natürlich auch die Möglichkeit, später in der Q&A Fragen zu stellen, genauso wie die Teilnehmenden hier im Raum. Und zwar, indem Sie die Frage einfach in den Chat tippen, die wird dann von meiner Kollegin Kerstin Kock im Raum vorgelesen. Wunderbar. Es wird heute ums Dolmetschen gehen, ein Vortrag über das Dolmetschen, der gedolmetscht wird. Diejenigen von Ihnen, die ihr Studium nach der Pandemie angefangen haben, werden eine andere Dolmetschwelt kennen und vor allen Dingen nach dem Studium kennenlernen, als die, in der wir noch aufgewachsen sind. Das liegt nicht nur an der Pandemie, sondern auch daran, dass Entwicklung wie KI, was ja auch das Leitthema unserer Konferenz dieses Semester ist, einfach eine Entwicklung ist, die ja wahnsinnig rasant voranschreitet und natürlich auch vor unserer Branche nicht Halt macht. Und das merken wir nicht nur darin, wie Konferenzen stattfinden, oft online, sondern auch in der Art und Weise, wie sich unsere Arbeitsprozesse ändern. Das heißt, dass wir zum Beispiel in unserer Vorbereitungstools nutzen, die es früher nicht unbedingt gab, dass wir Glossare anders erstellen, dass wir Wissensmanagement anders betreiben, als es früher der Fall war. Und zumindest mir geht es so, als jemand, der täglich damit zu tun hat, dass ich es auch nicht immer leicht finde, den Überblick zu behalten, um mir zu überlegen, was ist sinnvoll und was nicht. Und deswegen freue ich mich ganz besonders, dass wir heute einen ausgewiesenen Experten für diese Fragen hier haben. Er selbst würde es vielleicht nicht so sagen, aber trotzdem freuen wir uns sehr, dass Andy heute hier ist. Und damit würde ich dir auch ohne weitere Umschweife das Wort erteilen. Wir freuen uns sehr, Andy, dass du da bist und auf deinen Vortrag.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to the interpreters. Feel free to wave at me in a panic if I'm going too fast or not speaking clearly. Thank you very much for the invitation, Kirsten, Thilo. So I've been asked to talk about AI, and the title of my presentation is AI or DIY, a pragmatic look at glossaries, terminology, and AI tools in conference interpreting. DIY, in case you're not familiar with the term, is do it yourself in English. And I'm going to give you a little spoiler and tell you that although it's not a black and white answer, my answer to the question leans in the direction of DIY rather than AI. But I'm going to explain the details in a minute. I'm going to do something very British now as well. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say, and then I'm going to say it, and at the end, hopefully, I will tell you again what I've said, which is how we like to set up our presentations. So I'm going to give you a quick run-through of some of the new tools that have become available for conference interpreters over the last 3-4 years. It's all very, very new. Most of them powered by either narrow AIs or generalized AIs like ChatGPT and the like. Then I'm going to have a look at whether or not actually using AI is better than doing it yourself. And I think if I were to summarize the main message today, it's that AI is neither brilliant nor awful. If you're going to use it, it has to work for you. So you have to actually examine what you're doing with the AI, and you have to say to yourself, is it quicker? Is it better? Is it useful? And if it doesn't answer those questions, for God's sake, don't use it. A lot of people are just using AI because it's AI. Oh, it's lovely. You know, I'll ask ChatGPT. You've got to look at whether it's actually helping you. But again, I'm going to come back in more detail to that. And then, as a little specific, I'm going to wrap up looking at glossary building, because I think glossary building is something that all interpreters do in one form or another. And I hope that it'd be useful for you guys as you set out on your careers to have a little idea of some of the things that you might want to think about as you start creating glossaries. So how to create glossaries, how to organize them so that they're useful. So part one, which button? That one. Some of the new tools. I mean, I can't tell you about all the new tools or any of them in great detail, but this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at AI-driven PDF readers, which offer some functionalities that normal PDF readers don't offer. Look at some term extraction software. Then we're going to look at the idea of auto-filling your glossaries. So most of us have lots of blanks in our glossaries. AI offers us the opportunity to fill in those blanks without doing any work. I'm going to discuss whether that's a good idea or not. And there are also now in-booth live helpers, if you like. Some people call them digital booth mates. But there are software tools that can actually help you whilst you're interpreting, and we'll have a quick look at those. I would just say I'm not really an expert. I would call myself an enthusiastic amateur. And the real experts in this field are very, very few in the world of interpreting. And if anyone is actually interested in reading what real experts have to say, then you should look up Josh Goldsmith at Tech for Word. He does a lot of interesting stuff. And then two German colleagues, Anja Rutten, who runs a blog called Sprachmanagement.de, I think, and Martin Will, who is a terminology expert, and he writes about terminology, and I'm actually going to show you later a database, a glossary that's kind of inspired by his work. The other thing that I think is important to say is that interpreters are not early adopters of new technology. So the tools that I'm going to show you, these are tools for the future. These are potential tools. I don't think there are 6 people in Europe using these tools at the moment in the booth. The pioneers are testing them out. People like Anja Rutten, Josh Goldsmith, maybe Martin as well. They're testing them out to see if they work. So what I'm showing you here is not a reflection of the current state of the profession. I'm showing you the possible future of the profession. And just to give you a little demonstration of how slow we are to adapt in interpreting, how slow we are to adopt new technology. Colleague of mine, Hong Jiang from Hong Kong, did a survey of interpreters' glossary use in 2015. Now, 2015 might seem like a long time ago to those of you who are under 25, but 2015 is yesterday to those of us who've been interpreting for a few years. And in 2015, 60% of the people who answered Hong Jiang's survey were still using paper, sheets of paper, for their glossaries. Now, one thing I can't quite remember is why these numbers don't add up to 100, because usually percentages would add up to 100. So I would invite you to look at the methodology of the study. But I think regardless of that, the proportions are interesting. So 45% was a number using paper notebooks as opposed to loose pieces of paper. 55% of interpreters who answered the survey were using Word files. So one Word file per topic. Absolute chaos on the desktop. And only 15% were using actual glossary software, so real software made for the purpose of glossaries. So just to give you an idea that the technology we look at today is going to be a while in the coming, people won't be using it immediately, even the stuff that does work. So the first thing I wanted to show you was a PDF reader called Readwise. And basically, what this you download it as a plugin to Chrome, and I'll just play this silent film whilst you're doing this. So this would be how I prepare. So I've got to prepare something on CO2 emissions from cars and light utility vehicles, yeah, so vans. So I Google that. I find what I'm looking for, which is a European Commission webpage. I go to that page. I check that it's relevant. And then in the top left, you'll see the plugin that says Open in Reader. Okay, so I go to the web page. I'll click on that, and now I'm going to open it in Readwise. So this is the Readwise user interface, and this is now where Readwise does something a bit different. You go to that menu, and you invoke something called the Ghost Reader in Readwise. And you can then do the first two things, either of the first or both of the first two things in that menu, which are quite interesting. Summarize the document, or ask the document a question. I can't remember what I've done in this film. We'll soon find out. I think I asked for a summary. And then in the bottom corner, this little ghost appears to tell you that the ghost reader is reading. And then it produces a 400 or 500 word summary of the 50-page document, which you can copy and paste and read. So that is obviously potentially a very interesting time saver for interpreters prepping. I would say for anything more than 10 pages, this can save you a lot of time. Particularly the function of asking questions is quite useful. If the whole document is not really useful, but if you want to say, as I did with this example, I said, for example, what is the new maximum limit for particulate emission from cars according to this legislation? And it finds the answer in the document for me. So that's quite useful, on the assumption the answer is right. And then the trouble is, we don't yet know whether we can trust the AI to get the answer right. But sometimes it doesn't matter so much if the answer is wrong. It gives you an idea of what the answer might have been. So that's the first tool. Second tool is term extraction. And again, this is a way of dealing with very big documents. So this is a thing called Sketch Engine, and what it allows you to do is bring in two documents in two language versions, and then click Extract, and it will find in the documents what it thinks are the matching terms, and it will present them to you. And this is one of the strong points of Sketch Engine. It doesn't just give you the matching terms, it presents you one language and then gives you 3 or 4 options for the other language, and you have to kind of click just to check that it's actually the right one. And that engagement is very important, because I'm going to come back to this. If the computer does everything for you, you haven't done anything for yourself. And what doesn't go through your brain, what you don't process yourself, is not in there. So you can't get it back out. So this is why the title of this presentation is AI or DIY. The DIY is also thinking for yourself, because you can't remember something that you've never known. So this is quite useful because you do actually have to engage with the terminology. And another nice thing about Sketch Engine is if you're not sure about the terminology, you click on one of those terms in the list, and it'll show you exactly where it is in the two documents. And then you can actually read the two sentences. And so the first one, which is probably too small to see on the screen, but it's quite interesting that it picked completely the wrong word for the French, for the English. But I can look and read that sentence, and I can see what the French should have been, and then I can go back to this list, and I can click the right one. And then what Sketch Engine will do, you click on Export, and it'll export the two language versions that you've chosen in a table like that, which you can then use as your glossary cheat sheet or whatever for the meeting. And I don't know if, I mean, it's not the subject of the presentation, but if any of you like using flashcards to learn vocab, those two-column tables copy straight into flashcards like Quizlet, and you can use them to revise your vocab. Okay, next up we have glossary autofilling. So there's been an awful lot of stuff going on online where people have been saying, oh, this is brilliant, look, I can get ChatGTP to fill in my glossary, or even create a glossary for me, and I don't have to do anything. And this is a demonstration. So this is a tool called Interpret Bank, which was developed fairly close to here, I believe. Where does Mr. Fantanioli lecture? Here or in Germersheim? Yeah. So, and this is what happens if you, this is how you create a glossary. So the first part isn't necessarily, well, I'll show you just for the hell of it. So you create a glossary like that with a title of detergents. And for example, I've got a list of English terms which I'm going to import from a Word document. So I choose my Word document. This is just a mini glossary of 10 terms for the purposes. But this is the interesting bit. Before it imports, it asks, do you want to automatically translate the terms into German? So it automatically translates them into German. So from a monolingual glossary, gone to a bilingual glossary. Now the thing is that lots of people online have been saying, wow, that's absolutely amazing, brilliant. I never need to look anything up again. Okay? Trouble is, I obviously did this process backwards. So I started with a two-language glossary of my own, which I knew to be correct because it had been checked and it had been made during real meetings with real speakers and real experts. And that is what the 10 terms looked like when I actually compared them to the correct terms. So that's 10 terms, 5 of them are wrong. One of them is not quite right. And that is quite a poor return on your effort. And the other thing, apart from wrong, is that it can't offer me 2 versions of wash liquor. In my glossary, I have Waschlauge for wash liquor, but I also have an alternative German word for Waschliquor, for wash liquor, Waschlauge, which I can no longer remember. But I know there are other words, and of course, if I work from German into English, I want to know all of the possible words in advance, so that I'm not surprised by them. So this is, you know, this is an issue with automatic filling. And, you know, there's this, well, we'll come back to this, but if you have to check all of the words in a glossary, and you do, then you have to ask yourself, wasn't it quicker just to go and look them up in the first place? This is the problem. So you have an advantage with this sort of tool, because this is not the only sort of tool. I'm not picking on Interpret Bank. You can do this with ChatGTP. You can do this with Notion. You can do this with Interpreters Help, I think. And yeah, you can bring in your own glossaries. That's a great plus. But it has these failings. It will not only get things, well, it's getting things wrong for a number of reasons. It doesn't recognize technical fields, for example. Yeah, so this technical field is about detergent. So scaling, when you're talking about detergent, you're talking about washing up machines. So it's Belagsbildung in a dishwasher. Yeah, it's not Schuppen. I don't have Schuppen, but you might have Schuppen in German. So that it's very deceptive, particularly for beginner interpreters. It looks like it might be right, but you can make terrible mistakes if you're not checking what's going on there. Okay, yes, sorry, I've got another autofill for you. This is Notion. So Notion, I believe, is like a user interface that you can put on the front of ChatGTP. It just looks a bit more friendly, but I think behind the interface is still ChatGTP. So I asked it for, what did I do? I asked it for a glossary. So I said, can you give me the most frequently used terms in exhaust filter technology? Now you might say, wow, these are crazy technical areas, detergents, exhaust filter technology. This is where we need the terms. You don't need the terms in everyday English and German, you need them in the very technical stuff. So that's the reason for. So you can see it's quite a nice process. You ask it a question, it gives you some terms. I would argue with the term ash, for example. The others are actually relevant terminology. Ash is not, it's wrong. And then I ask it to translate those terms into German. Oops. I'll just stop it there now. So it's not bad as a list, but the trouble is, we don't know if we can trust it. So, I mean, I happen to know that most of those terms are actually useful, and I can't judge whether they're well translated into German, but I think they are. The English terms seem okay, except for ash. Ash is not what comes out of the back of a car. Fine partikeln or fine particulate pollution, but certainly not ash. And now the problem is that you have to check the terms. If you can check the terms, you're already an expert, so you didn't need to do this. And if you can't check the terms, you're not an expert, so you shouldn't be doing this. And this is where the paradox comes. And if you have to go and, I mean, like I say, I think DIY, you should probably go and find out what these terms mean and what they are in English yourself, because although this might be right, you can't be sure. And it's the not being sure which is the problem. Okay, next tool, actual in-booth help. And this is, this is really quite a cool little tool. It's called Simonnote. And you plug it into the audio, and it will do a live transcription of what it hears. It will color the numbers in blue. And if you input your own glossary into Simonnote before the meeting, when it recognizes a glossary term, it will highlight that in red and offer you the translation in brackets. Okay, so it looks like this. You won't hear, but for this demo, I'm basically reading to it in English, and I've already input a glossary into the system, and it's about cigarette manufacture, this glossary. It's a patent, in fact. So it's quite amusing that it gets its own name wrong right at the beginning. It's Simonnote. So I'm reading to it at this stage, and you can see already the number is in blue, so that's quite useful if you're an interpreter. The number stands out. And now you can see how the red, the English is electronic cigarette tip, and then the German is in brackets after that from my glossary, not from the internet or anything, it's actually from my glossary. So again, I mean, this is a potentially fabulous tool. You know, we write down numbers for each other, we humans, in the booth. So having a machine do it seems like a good idea. But it does have some problems. So if you can see here, let's have a look. This 180 band, right? That was actually in English the word toe band, which is the front end of a cigarette. It's the name in manufacturing of the part where the filter is, that end of a cigarette. And this was the first term in my glossary, which I put into this tool. And it couldn't understand it, either in English or find it in the glossary. And this term came up 3 times in this 6-line extract. Here, so it's called it a 180 band. Here it's called it a toy band. And then further down, it calls it a tow bar. So it's, again, potentially fabulous, but actually unreliable. And then you need to ask yourself the question, do I have the mental capacity to interpret simultaneously and work out in my head whether the computer is telling me something useful or not? I don't know if you guys have done simultaneous with text yet. So I cannot interpret simultaneously and sight translate at the same time. So when I look at a text and start reading it, I can't interpret anymore. So my strategy for simultaneous with text is to read the text in advance and then put the text to one side, because I can't do both at the same time. Some people can, but I can't. So then you have to ask yourself the question, can I read the computer screen, work out whether the computer screen is talking rubbish or not, and interpret at the same time? I can't. So I can't use this tool, or I don't at the moment. Other very fundamental issues with this tool, you have to have a good glossary to go into it in the first place. Okay? And if you have a good glossary, which I'm going to suggest you will have made yourself, if you have made a good glossary yourself, you don't need the computer to tell you what's in the glossary, because you will remember it because you made the glossary yourself. So it becomes a sort of zero-sum game. You know, it looks nice, but is it worth it? There's also a cost. I mean, this thing costs money. And it wasn't cheap. Well, I did an experiment, and I think it was something like between 10 and 20 euro for an hour. Right? So over a day, I mean, you can get monthly subscriptions and what have you, and there may be cheaper versions, but this tool was not being given away for free, and quite rightly so. I mean, you know, it's a sophisticated tool, but it costs money. The other thing that you have with this tool is confidentiality. Does your customer want a written record of the meeting? Because this is a written record of the meeting, and that may not be desirable. It may be for confidentiality reasons, or it may be, for example, I work, as does Thilo, at the European Patent Office. The meetings are not confidential, but recording of the meetings is not allowed. And this is a recording of the meeting. So this is not allowed at the European Patent Office, where it might be quite useful, but it's not allowed. Okay, and one other in-booth tool. This is just a screenshot. Oh, sorry, I haven't put it on there. Oh, hello. There we go. So this is taken from the website of a company called iBridge, and this is live transcription and translation at the same time into text. So it's almost interpreting. There just isn't the voice synthesizer to speak the translation. So this is this example, which you can find on the website, iBridge People. This is a speech by Angela Merkel. And you'll see the demo on the website. It translates it into, I guess that's Spanish at the bottom, is it? Spanish and English, and it transcribes into German. But you can already see it can't do everything, because what she says is, she's talking to Mario Draghi, the president of the ECB, who has been her political partner for many, many years, and she turns to him and in German says, "Jetzt wechsle ich mal ins Du, lieber Mario," because they're friends, and the computer can't work that out. So it says, "Wechsle ich mal in das Duo," which is complete nonsense. And so again, is it helping? That's the ultimate question. So let me just sort of recap now on it's that button, isn't it? Oh, hello. Not that direction. Here we go. So those are the new tools. Now let's look at this question just for a moment: AI or DIY? So here are, I think, some of the reasons why DIY beats AI. I noticed one or two of you taking notes on the computer. Now, I don't want to pick anybody out, but it is scientifically demonstrated that handwritten notes go into your brain better than typed notes, because you have to think a little bit more about what you write on the page, just like in consecutive interpreting. And because you think about where it is on the page, you remember it. If you don't process, you can't remember. There's also a very human element of sort of geospatial. If you write with your hand, you can actually remember, oh yeah, I wrote that at the top right-hand corner. I wrote that bottom left. When you type on a computer, I find even writing on an iPad, you lose the geospatial element of where you put things. So engagement with content is quite important if you want that content to be available to you as an interpreter. And when I say available, I mean, can you recall it when you're in the booth? Can you remember what the threshold limit value for particulate emissions from cars was in the draft legislation? If Readwise told you, you probably can't remember. If you read it yourself and wrote it down, you probably can remember. So, and again, the summary of documents, the extraction of terminology is very good, but automation, I believe, in interpreter preparation is a zero-sum game. So what I mean is, zero-sum, it adds up to the same. If you automate here, then you have to activate here. So if your preparation process involved reading something yourself and then going into the booth, and you could remember it, But then you decided, right, I'm not going to read it myself, I'm going to automate the reading and use Readwise. Then, over here, you have to add an activation phase. You have to do something to activate the knowledge, otherwise it's not available to you in the booth. So, with terminology extraction, same thing. If you read a document and you write out the words yourself, you're activating them just by writing them out. You will remember them because you've written them out. If the machine extracts them for you, then you have to add flashcards later on to activate. And you have to test yourself on the vocab to activate. Now, that's not a bad thing. I don't have a preference, but you have to be aware that the automation is not saving you time. The automation is shifting the hard work from here to here. So if you don't like reading, get the machine to do it, but be aware that later you're going to have to maybe do some flashcards. You can't get round the hard work. You can just move it around in your preparation process. So it's a zero-sum game. Preparation is not quicker with AI. It's different. And I mean, there are so many possibilities. You just have to look at them all with a critical eye, choose the one that suits you. But don't think of it as a magic bullet. Reliability. So I've mentioned this a couple of times already. Checking whether or not the output of a machine is reliable or correct whilst you're working in the booth is extra cognitive load. And most of us are already maxed out on cognitive load. I don't know, like I say, I can't cite translate and do simultaneous interpreting. I can't read a book and do simultaneous interpreting. I can't check whether Notion is right or not and do simultaneous interpreting. So if you don't believe the machine, that's a real problem. I mean, one thing that used to be an absolute golden rule, if you were going to write down a number or a bit of terminology for your colleague, like human to human, in the booth, it absolutely had to be right. You can't present the wrong answer to your colleague. They'll just kill you for it afterwards. So the problem here is that we have the machine giving us the wrong information, and we're too trusting of the machine. And again, I think I would repeat what I said earlier. You have to check AI's output from terminology. And if you can check, then you're doing your own preparation, so the AI wasn't necessarily useful. So if you know nothing about the topic, and then you go and check online, then the AI is not saving you time. If you can check, you know how to check, because you're already an expert, then you didn't need the AI in the first place. And if you're not an expert, and you can't check, then you shouldn't be trusting the AI. So for me, a lot of the time, the DIY is better than the AI. I mean, there are other things as well. AI is strictly limited to the internet. And so if it's not published on the internet, the AI can't find it. But a lot of the meetings that we're doing are absolutely cutting edge. So I mean, the patent office, for example, there's not a lot of non-patent literature that is published about this stuff because it's brand new. But that goes for everything. Every meeting is a technical meeting, and it's not all published on the internet. And the reason we had glossaries 20 years ago was because the information wasn't available publicly. If you work at NATO, for example, none of that is available on the internet. It's all top secret. So everyone has their own glossary, because otherwise there is no glossary. So AI or DIY? Number 3, is it actually saving you time and effort? That's the question that you should ask yourself. The answer might be yes, in which case, great. If AI is saving you time and effort and offering you the right answers, then go for it, use it. But do approach it with a critical eye. 2.3, yeah, so confidentiality and recording restrictions. I mean, again, I've touched upon this, but just taking my own personal situation, I work in one institution where all meetings are confidential, so none of these tools would be allowed in that one, the European Space Agency in Paris. Absolutely none of these tools would be allowed because all the documents are confidential. At the European Patent Office, none of the documents are confidential, so some of those tools will work, but the in-booth helper would not be allowed because that is recording the meeting. And the European Parliament, the European Commission, some of the meetings are confidential, some of them aren't. So there would be a mixture. And my feeling is if you can't use the tool every single time, it gets to be a bit of a hassle. Like, oh, today I'm using it, tomorrow I'm not using it. You sort of, it becomes a cognitive effort to work the tool because you're not working the tool every day. It'd be like changing from Mac to Windows every 2 days. It's like, oh, crap, how do I do it? Oh, okay, it's there. And that's not the sort of question you need to ask. You don't want to ask yourself that sort of question in the booth. You don't have time. So you want everything to be very quick. And the other thing about confidentiality and recording restrictions, in my experience, when you ask a customer, an institution or somebody who works or has recruited you, whether you can use a tool in their meeting, they simply don't know what the tool is. They don't know whether the tool is secure or not. So, for example, Sketch Engine has an ISO standard security label. It has a label. But, I mean, what does that mean? And so what I've had happen to me is I ask if I can use the tool. The person opposite has no idea. And they either just say no because the no is the easy answer, and they don't want to investigate, or they send it up the hierarchy in the institution, and then my request disappears into the institution, comes back weeks later with a no, because I'm a very, very, interpreters are a very, very small set of fish in the big pond of the institution, and they don't care about us using this tool, so it's just like, no. So there are lots of reasons why these tools end up not being very practical to use. Next, there is a technical barrier. I've already said, that interpreters are very slow to adopt. You have to learn to use a new tool, and you have to be able to use a new tool very, very quickly without thinking about it, because you've got no time or brain space to think in the booth. So you have to do a lot of playing with a tool outside the booth in order to make it work in the booth. And most interpreters stop at the first barrier. I don't know about you, but most internet services, I'm not even going to log in. If I have to log in and register, that's enough of a barrier, and I just stop. And there are very few. You only need 1 or 2 technical barriers. Most interpreters will stop. And cost. I mean, interpreters, hate to say it, we are very, very stingy. And most interpreters don't pay for software at all. I mean, maybe your generation is more used to paying for software, but when I was 25, 30, software was all free. Everything was free. And now, paying for it seems a bit weird, but a lot of people also, I can't be bothered to either learn to use it or pay for it. Why would I pay for it? So that's stopping interpreters using these tools as well. So to sum up on the AI or DIY thing, I would say experiment with it by all means, but keep asking yourself the question, is it really helping me? Am I really saving time? Are the answers really right? And where you guys are at the moment, learning to interpret, I would really say do it yourself, DIY, because you want stuff you want to process stuff mentally yourselves so that you remember it, you understand it. Learning how to analyze a 50-page document is part of learning to be an interpreter. Learning how to read a 50-page document in 3 minutes That's part of being an interpreter. You can ask a computer to do it, but you don't understand how the computer has done it. So you've missed something about the document. But knowing to look at, for example, the table of contents in a document, knowing that most documents have an executive summary of 1 page, knowing that French documents have the table of contents at the back, not the front. These are useful things for interpreters to be able to do instantaneously in the booth. And again, I think if you're learning to interpret, it's probably more useful to do it yourself. So let me now come to the third part of this presentation. And this is something about glossary building and glossary building ourselves. And for this, this part of the presentation, I owe a vote of thanks to Martin Will, who by chance became my sort of mentor in things glossaries about 25 years ago, because we worked a lot together. And he was very big into glossaries and databases at the time. And the ideas that you're about to see are really derivative of his ideas and his publications, which go into much more detail than I will today. So, before I get to the list on the screen, I think what's interesting, one thing that's interesting about glossaries and databases is that perhaps one of the main reasons for having one in the first place has changed in the 25 years since I started interpreting. So 25 years ago, you could not get hold of technical glossaries anywhere. There was barely an internet to speak of, and I would come into the booth either with my Ernst dictionary of whatever it's called, Industrietechnik, brilliant dictionary, or the other brilliant dictionary, Schäfer's Wirtschaftswörterbuch, also beautiful, purple and silver. But there were only dictionaries, there were not online glossaries. So interpreters created glossaries so they had something relevant to take into the booth with them, because they couldn't find the information anywhere else. Nowadays, it's almost completely the opposite. There's so much information available on the internet that the question is not, is there any information? It's, what is the useful information out of this massive, massive pile of information I've got in front of me? But yeah, and the answer can be the same, and that is having your own glossary. What can a glossary do for you? Well, if you're prepping for a meeting, let's have a think. Yeah, so if you read Martin Will's work, you'll see he often talks about actually 3 stages to glossary building, and this might surprise people, but there's a preparation stage before the meeting where you write stuff down, and then there is a stage during the meeting, and then there's a stage after the meeting, and things happen with your glossary during all of these stages. So when you look up brand new words and concepts, Wikipedia, and go to technical websites, you're reading definitions, you're actually activating just because you're engaging with the terminology and you're writing stuff down. And you'll be writing down terms that you already know that you want to activate and terms that you don't know. So you create a glossary ahead of a meeting and you're learning stuff as you go along. Then during the meeting, you'll be doing 2 things. One, you'll be using the glossary list that you've made, looking at it, drawing on it from memory. But you'll also be checking your glossary list against what's actually said in the meeting. Because really the ultimate arbiter of whether the glossary is right or not is that meeting, the person in that meeting. Wikipedia can be wrong, Ernst can be wrong, even Duden can be wrong. As far as the interpreter is concerned, the guy in the meeting, if the German delegate says it, then for that meeting, it's right. Might not be right in another meeting, but it's right in that meeting. So you're checking your glossary as you go along, and you're also looking stuff up in the booth. Now, if you want to use your glossary to look things up in the booth, to actually type in wie heißt denn anaionische Tenzid auf Englisch, and you type it in, what your glossary needs to do for you is give you access to everything that's in it. When you're looking up a word, it can't just be looking in a small bit of your glossary. It's got to look everywhere. Otherwise, it may well not find it. So you probably want things in one file. But again, there's definitely two different sort of schools of practice. Some interpreters do look things up in the booth. Like actually, whilst they're interpreting, they'll type a word into a computer, and the computer will give them an answer. And there are a lot of other interpreters who use a computer for everything except that, because they don't have the brain space to look something up and interpret at the same time. And I'm one of the latter. And then the third phase is like post-preparation. So after the meeting, you've got notes that you've written down whilst you were in the meeting. You've got your glossary, you've got what you can remember, and you bring them all together to correct the terminology list and put that into a glossary for next time. And then the next time you do the same meeting, because usually we do the same meetings again and again, you've already got the glossary available. So creating a glossary is learning about stuff. It's creating a glossary when no glossary exists for very technical meetings. It's activating the terminology so that you can actually remember it instantly when you need it. It's also there for looking stuff up in the booth. And then, when you get to this post-preparation stage, it's even going to help you remember in the long term. Most of us are only worried about being able to remember terminology that day. And we forget 95% of stuff immediately afterwards. But if you do post-preparation and you write stuff into your glossary and correct it, and you tidy it up sort of thing, you actually find that you remember stuff for a bit longer, a few more weeks. So if you do a similar meeting a couple of weeks later, you have to do less preparation. And then, of course, the glossary gives you preparation for next time. So very often, I do quite a lot of meetings about detergents. So washing up powder and washing powder for clothes. So dishwashing and washing machines. And so I can just pull up a glossary and see immediately sort of 20 key terms like tensid, which is surfactant, and remind myself, because it's not a word I use in my everyday life. And okay, next time I'm ready to go. Before I've even looked at the documents for the meeting, I've got 10, 15 key terms that I've just reactivated. So, how are we doing time-wise? Got lots of time left? No. So let's have a quick look, a very practical, step-by-step, this is how my glossary database is built up. 10 minutes? And as I say, very much based on the ideas that I was shown by Martin Will. So it seems perfectly logical for an interpreter to organize their vocabulary by customer. So one day I might be working for an aircraft manufacturer. Another day I'm working for a patent lawyer or the patent office. And I've got two different meetings, two different sets of vocab. But let's say what I find for any single meeting is that you have actually two separate types of terminology in a given meeting. You have a technical topic area, and then you have the in-house administrative stuff that is specific to that institution, to that company, to that customer. And that is not about the technical topic. So for example, I do a works council, which is a union representative body for an aircraft manufacturer. So they talk about two things. They talk about aircraft and they talk about workers' rights and how the company is set up. Very different things, but always the same two. And then when I'm doing patents, for example, I might be talking about aircraft again, but the in-house stuff is very different. Then it's patent law and how patent law works. So like I was saying, a lot of... Oh, I've lost a slide, have I? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so a lot of interpreters will have two Word files. This is supposed to represent two Word files on a computer. And it doesn't matter whether you can read the terms or not. But the blue is about aircraft, and the black is about other stuff. But if I've got my aircraft, what happens next time I've got a meeting, I know, for a third customer about aircraft? But I've got my aircraft stuff in two glossaries. So that's not helpful, is it? I want to put them together. So how do I put them together? I create a single table, and in that table I have two extra columns. I have German, I have English, then I have topic area, whatever you want to call it, subject, topic, and then I have customer name. So that's what these two mini glossaries look like. There were 10 words in each glossary, and now I put them into a single table. And then what you can do, what have I done there? Is filter by aircraft. So filter means I go into this column here and I ask the computer to remove everything that doesn't say aircraft. And because computers are good at this stuff, it does that for me, and it brings together the 10 terms from the two different meetings about aircraft. And there I have my technical aircraft terminology. So I use Microsoft Access, which allows me to look for aircraft in one column and then also arrange the French column alphabetically, for example. So that, but you can do any column alphabetically. I can also, of course, do it the other way around. I can still filter by customer. I can still go to my aircraft manufacturer, choose all the vocab for my aircraft manufacturer. I can also choose aircraft manufacturer and aircraft, filter by the two columns, because as we'll see in a minute, sometimes different institutions have different words for the same thing. So the advantage of having all your stuff in a single table is when you search for something, if it's there, it'll find it, because everything is in there. You can filter, so you can still narrow it down, and you can sometimes you can see whether there are two terms. I'll show you this in a second. So in again, I'm selling the method here, not the tool. I use Microsoft Access. I think Microsoft Access is very powerful in terms of filtering. But there are other tools that may be as powerful. I think Ninox is one that I've just been told about. Let me just check that. Yeah, Ninox is an online database. Interpreters Help has a database, as does Interpret Bank, but they don't allow quite so many columns to filter. So in Microsoft Access, you have these icons, which mean filter, and you can filter away. What I think is nice, as I was saying, sometimes the same word means different things in different places. And because you have this metadata, this information that's attached to the vocabulary, so who's the customer, you can see that, for example, secondment in the European Space Agency is Abordnung in German, but in the European institution, the EU institutions, it's Entsendung. And that's useful if you work in both places. And only by having all of your terminology in one place and having the terminology associated to a customer can you see that at a glance. So this format obviously is expandable pretty much ad infinitum. So if you imagine, here are our two original customers, the aircraft manufacturer, the patent customer, then we have another customer, an international institution that decides to talk about intellectual property. So we've got intellectual property in green, we've got aircraft in blue. We can still put them all into the same single table, but this time I filtered for patent vocab. And now I have the patent vocab from customers 2 and 3 instead of the aircraft vocab from customer 1 and 2. And that basically goes on for as many customers as you like. One thing I would tell you as you set out on glossary building is that you can design your glossary or your database carefully, but you can't really know how much aircraft terminology is going to be in it in 10 years' time, or how much intellectual property terminology is going to be in it in 10 years' time. So, for example, what happened to me, I had lots of patent stuff, and then I realized, okay, it's not all about patents. Some of it is broader, about intellectual property. So I have another column. So I have English, German, topic, subtopic. Well, actually, the other way around in this table. I have subtopic, then customer. And then I can filter intellectual property, so I have something quite broad, or I can filter by patents and have something quite narrow. And actually, over the years, because I'm an obsessive collector, things have got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I have a third, I have a subtopic. Because what I want to filter out when I'm prepping is a list of 30-odd words. I don't want 500 words to look at when I'm prepping, I want 30, because that's manageable. Let me just give you another, not sure that slide's in the right place, but look, just in case you didn't believe me, and again, this is why the internet and glossaries are not always. Here's an example of some words that mean different things in different places. So the Polish word skarżący means 2 different things in the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. If it's in an antitrust case, that is called the complainant. If it's in more general European Court of Justice procedure, that word is translated as applicant. And because it's very legal, you have to get it right. So this is the value of the metadata. The extra columns tell you, oh yeah, okay, I can't just... See, ChatGPT will just say applicant to you, and you say applicant and it's wrong. And you don't know why it's wrong, and no one's told you it's wrong. So the metadata is really useful. Similarly, if you were to talk about Belagsbildung on the blades of a gas turbine in an airplane, you would be laughed out of the room because it is the rather beautiful word Verzunderung in German, and not, but in English they're both scaling. So again, it's useful to know that one comes from Henkel, the German detergent giant, and the other one comes from Airbus, the aircraft manufacturer. And similarly, ESA means at least 3 different things in different places. So look, this is just to show you quickly what a bit of my glossary looks like. I actually have another 4 or 5 columns. So I have English, French, German, and Polish. Then I have subtopic. No, sorry, I have subtopic, and topic. Then I have the meeting, which is the customer. Then I have the source for the English or the German. I have the source for the French or the Polish. And that's really useful as well, because in 10 years, you won't remember where the word came from. In 10 years, you can go, oh no, that word, it was my colleague Gillies told me that. Not sure I believe that. But you might have written Ernst, comes from the Ernst dictionary. Ah, okay, that's good. If it's from Ernst, I can believe it. The date is good as well. Rather embarrassingly, if you look at the top right-hand corner here, you can see that my glossary was active in 1997. So I might be a little bit more suspicious about using those words because they might be out of date. But my glossary is going to tell me that. And then I also have a little column for definitions. So extra just text. And this even allows you to link to files. So you might just have a Word file or some company document that's useful that you can link to from the database. Still got 2-3 minutes? No? I can skip this one. 2? So this is just to show you how this works. So if I want to prep something, okay, I had a meeting about the electricity market a couple of weeks ago, and I know that I've got electricity in here, so I go to my detail column and I look for electricity, and I see that I've got a topic or subtopic called electricity generation, so I click filter by selection, I get all my electricity generation terminology, and you can see there's 91 terms in the bottom left-hand corner. But as I'm looking through it, I notice that some of them are not about the electricity grid. They're very much about wind turbines. And so I can go into the advanced filter, and I go into another column, the subject column, and I'm going to write not wind turbines. And then the glossary is going to show me everything that says electricity in one column, but it's going to take out wind turbines because I don't want wind turbines. And so there you have, and I've got that down to 70 terms about the European electricity market. So as I say, there's 3 phases to glossary building. There's before the meeting, there's during the meeting when you're checking, making sure they're right and maybe looking stuff up, and there's after the meeting where you can correct your notes, tidy your notes up, enter them into your glossary, and give free rein to your obsessive compulsive disorder, as I do when I'm organizing things in my glossary. But just to give you an idea of the power of the human brain, because I've done all this myself, if you give me a word in English or German, I'm 99% certain I can tell you whether it's in my glossary or not. I might not be able to translate it. But I can tell you whether it's in there because I did the DIY and not the AI. So AI is good, could be good. Be critical about it. And my recommendation initially would be DIY. Thank you.